You went into my room?
I did.
You went through my stuff?
I know I shouldn't have.
Cloud! You asshole!
It seems like the tides are churning where Final Fantasy VII producer Square Enix erased its ethics department that talked about the progressive politics that they brag about when they're censoring video games. This is an article I read about in the past. It was based on the ethics department for Square Enix where they're bragging how they censor their games to fit a westernized political agenda. And this was something where they were recruiting people to continue the censorship of multiple games that were in production and are about to come out. But it seems like the tides have changed since Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has met its production deadline and is about to be released, because they kind of X'd it out and erased it from its website, and they're really stepping back from this idea of aggressively censoring their games. There are still some elements of censorship people have seen in the game, but I don't think it is as drastic as changing Tifa's chest size. That was the biggest complaint people had with the first Final Fantasy VII remake, and now that we got this version of Tifa that kind of has her robust size back in play, people have been celebrating it. And now this mysterious disappearance of its ethics department page where it was bragging about censoring elements of this game for a westernized audience. And I think this is not a coincidence that this has recently disappeared. It's just making up for a fact that maybe a lot of these video game developers have been noticing the tide has been churning with a lot of people in America, a lot of the people in the westernized world, where they don't want this degree of censorship, especially in particular with some of the female characters in these video games, where they're reducing their overall femininity and masculinizing them to a certain extent where it's just not in a favorable way where the players actually want to play the game. I think that is the central thing a lot of these games companies are realizing, that okay, these consultancy firms that are giving us advice, telling us what to censor, are not telling us what to censor in a good faith manner. They're telling us what to censor based on their own moral standards, not on the American people standards, not on the video game players in America standards. And this looks like it's a thing that's catching on within the Japanese industry, where they're realizing, oh, the people that we're working with, the consultancy firms, are actually political activist committees that are trying to change these games for political ends and not trying to localize them to be more in a custom with the general audience that is going to play our games. And we saw this with the manga and the anime industry, where we have anime localizers that are being caught up by these Japanese industries, where they're noticing they're changing the overall story and dialogue of their properties to fit their own personal political agenda. And I think in them noticing that, they have turned to AI to assist them rather than these localized translators. And I think this is the same thing that we're seeing in the video game industry, where these developers are noticing, okay, we're getting a misguided direction where the fans actually hate what we're changing, so we're going to change very little, maybe small things that we didn't like. I know there's some controversy over a scene with Tifa's panties, but that's something I think was inconsequential to the story or anything else. It was just a bad joke. And I think we're seeing the results of that, where people are changing their overall perspectives on how to develop these games and removing the sensitivity readers, removing the overall consultancy firms like Sweet Baby Inc. that was having a part of the production of some Square Enix game, but now even that page is gone itself. So it seems like Sweet Baby Inc. is gone from the equation for Square Enix, and this is continuing on in such a way where they're erasing entire departments from their website because it has nothing to do with their plans in the future, specifically the censorship and ethics department. They're seeing the controversy as well, and it's just showing that what we say online and what we say overall on social media is having an effect, and our reaction with not buying these games is affecting the company. I think Square Enix was deeply affected when Forspoken was a complete failure, and they filed every single ethics department sensitivity reader from the West their guidelines. They race swapped the characters, they put in modern day social media language as a dialogue, they brought in the terrible writers from the West, and it produced an absolutely terrible game. And I think that is the thing where they realize, okay, we can't follow these people. We're almost bankrupted our company by following their advice. We can't do that anymore. And I think that's where we're getting a compromise here, not even a compromise, a step away from that overall censorship ideal of following the westernized standard, at least with Square Enix Enix and the Final Fantasy franchise. I don't know if this is completely done with the entirety of Square Enix, but we know Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has benefited from that step away from that censorship board of the ethics department of Square Enix. And I think that's the overall positivity thing that we're seeing here, where people are having a voice and it is affecting these video game developers, where they are changing what they're doing with the overall look of characters. If you've seen what other Western developers have done to the characters, you can just look at the list of faces that have changed for a lot of these premier franchise characters. I'm talking about Lara Croft, where they masculinized her jaw, her overall face. I'm talking about Fable and Microsoft. They just took a beautiful model, made her super ugly and just unattractive in a way where only people that have a different sensibility would appeal to this character. And you just see it with Mortal Kombat, where they did everything they did with Lara Croft to a lot of the female characters in that game. And of course Avengers, where they're still hyper focused on bringing this masculinized jawline that is breaking away from the typical appeal that we see from a lot of these characters when they were developed beforehand. That is the case with a lot of Western developers, and Japanese developers have been following that trend as well, even as people in Japan have been roasting them for doing it and saying, what are you doing? We don't want this westernized ugly standard to be developed in these studios. And we see this spreading across this ideal, where a lot of developers in Korea are going against the grain and developing something in the opposite that is going against this. I'm talking about Stellar Blade, Dead or Alive, and a lot of these fighting games like Tekken that are just going against the grain and not following that standard. And I think we had hope that they would change. We have no clear-cut evidence other than this ethics page going away, but I think it's a step in the right direction, where we're seeing changes being made. People are heeding some of the warning signs and the words of people on social media, and they're stepping away from what I think is a disastrous direction of their development studio. Because if we know anything about the video game studio, it just takes 1 or 2 failures to actually end your studio. And I think that is the benefit of the video game industry too, where they have to adapt quickly or they will fail and go bankrupt and everyone lose their jobs. We saw this with Volition and Saints Row. We saw this with multiple other studios that came out with this modern day political angle that went bankrupt immediately afterwards, and they had to pivot somewhere else. And I think that is the thing here with Square Enix. Forspoken was a disaster, and they realized we can't use this modern day philosophy. We have to harken back to what we know best. And I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is that, and we're getting the benefits of that failure and the benefits of a video game industry that has to be successful. Hollywood doesn't have to be successful. It can produce 17 bombs in a row, and a studio head might still be in power. He still might be president. He might even get promoted. And I think that's the opposite with the video game industry. Your studio will go under immediately if you fail. And I think that is the pressure Square Enix has, where they can't play with these philosophies because some UCLA graduate with a multiple master's degree in writing is saying you have to follow this progressive agenda, or I'm gonna get the game journalists after you. They don't have the luxury to do that. So that's why I think we're gonna see more rapid change of the video game industry rather than in Hollywood than in any of these other industries. But that's just my 2 cents. You tell me what you think about the situation. Final Fantasy VII, Square Enix removing their ethics page, getting rid of their censorship page, and maybe refocusing on developing something that gamers actually like. Leave your comments, like, share, and subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.